If you want to get to the top of a mountain or a building, would you rather climb a rope up a sheer vertical face or use a stairway? This will be a quick one. I just want to illustrate a simple concept that I think is valuable for any upcoming producer to internalize. We've all heard the phrase, fix it in the mix. This usually means that we're settling for something that is subpar and we're hoping that we can just fix it later because we don't want to take the time to get it right in the moment. Sometimes this is unavoidable, but in most cases, it's usually just laziness that makes us adopt this mindset. We want to move on from the tedium that is tracking the same performance over and over and over again, so we give up and send the problem to the future for someone else to deal with. Sometimes that other person is our future selves. We've also all heard people talk about how the fix it in the mix concept is a bad idea, but sometimes it could be unclear what this actually means. Do our tracks need to be absolutely perfect when we capture them, like just ready to go to mastering? What is perfect? How do we know when something is good enough to go to mixing or when it needs to be retracked or edited? To help explain the concept, I'm going to borrow a different concept from Richard Dawkins, the inventor of the meme. He's also a biologist who has written multiple books about evolution. Whether you believe that evolution is a real thing or not, there are a lot of similarities between it and music production. Stick with me for a minute. To explain the complexity of life on Earth as we see it today, there are two camps. Those who believe that it poofed into existence in its current form more or less instantly, and those who believe that it gradually evolved from simple organisms to more and more complex ones over billions of years. To illustrate the move from simplicity to complexity, Dawkins likens it to climbing a mountain, or in his words, climbing Mount Improbable. Life either climbed to the top of this mountain instantly by jumping up a sheer vertical face, or it used small incremental steps over time to eventually reach the top. Building a production is similar because we start from a simple concept and eventually reach the point of having a finished production full of complexity and nuance. If we're impatient, we'll be tempted to take shortcuts and try to go from nothing to everything all at once. Achieving this would be miraculous. If we're patient and we take our time and don't try to skip any steps, we have a much less challenging climb to the top. It's just one step at a time. At any point during production, if we decide to fix something in the mix, we're essentially trying to skip steps. But the problem is that we're not leaping up to a higher step, we're just putting off that vertical movement for a later time. We trade vertical movement for horizontal movement, and at some point in the future we're going to have to try to make up that vertical progress and expend much more energy trying to do so. We're handicapping the potential of our production by doing this. If we look at this like a staircase, where the bottom is the beginning of the production when it's nothing more than an idea, and the top is the finished product, all of the steps in between represent the necessary steps and decisions on the way to the top. Each step sets up the next all the way up. For an oversimplified example, before we can record a song, we need to write the individual parts and put them together as an arrangement. The full song can only be as good as the individual parts, so it's wise to not cut any corners in the initial writing process. When it comes time to record the parts, we need to first make sure that we can play those parts exactly as we want them to sound on the final recording. This often means practicing our ass off before we even attempt the recording. We also need to prepare by setting up the session and the instruments, making sure everything is in tune and that we're getting the best signal possible. Once we've captured the best performance possible, we need to double check that it meets our standards and edit things to eliminate any problematic issues that we weren't able to eliminate during tracking just by doing it again but better. By the way, doing it again but better will always yield better results than editing a subpar performance. But that's obvious, right? I didn't really need to include that here, right? When we get to the mixing section of the staircase, that mix can only be as good as our source tones, performance, and arrangement decisions. So hopefully we didn't skip any steps during that section or we will be at a disadvantage. When we get to mastering, that master can only be as good as the mix, which can only be as good as the source tones, which can only be as good as their performances, which can only be as good as the underlying parts. This is a gross oversimplification because there are way more steps than I am describing here, but hopefully you get the concept. The more diligent we are with any one step, the easier the next step will be. If we try to skip a step or half-ass something, the more difficult the next step will be. Our main goal with any session should be to make the next step as easy as possible. This takes a bit of experience and trial and error, but this is what separates professionals from amateurs. It's not just hiring some awesome mixer as a cleanup crew to fix all of the problems that we've given them at the end of our recording process. It's taking care with every step along the way to set up the next step for success. We're always thinking about the next guy, even if that's us, and we're trying to make their job as easy and stress-free as possible. So the next time you start a production, keep this concept in mind. The minute you decide to fix it in the mix, remember that you're just trading vertical movement for horizontal movement. Sometimes it's best to hold off on the climb and just put in a bit more practice, or hire a session musician or a specialist to help you get to the next step rather than trying to skip it. It's tempting to give the mix process more credit than it really deserves. The best mixes come from good source material, and good source material requires a lot of work and attention to detail. If you internalize this concept, you will see a massive improvement in your productions because they'll be built on a solid foundation. By the way, this concept also applies for skill progression. If you try to skip the basics and jump straight into advanced techniques, you're building your skill set on a weak foundation. But that's a topic for another video. Like this video and subscribe if this was helpful and you feel like liking and/or subscribing. Peace! Well, I think I got through a whole video without cussing.